Today, I'm excited to welcome Tyler Cornett to the podcast. Tyler's in Boston, and he's a Bitcoin teacher, a writer, and a software developer. I knew Tyler when he used to live in Miami, and we had some great discussions about investing. He offers an excellent free Bitcoin course on X that's perfect for getting started. We'll dive into that and much more. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Tyler.
Hi, Paula. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So when I knew you in Miami and we were friends, I was in a career in the Coast Guard. And I ended up getting transferred up to Boston and I completed that career. And ever since then, I've been doing mostly front end software development type jobs, some systems administration, just enjoying life up here in Boston.
I
Um,
remember we used to discuss the permanent theory portfolio, which is 25% gold, 25% stocks, 25% bonds, and I think 25% cash. Tell me
yes.
about that and how that led you to Bitcoin.
I remember that now. That's funny you say that because I've been wanting to read a little bit more on how popular the permanent portfolio still is these days. I think it still, can serve a lot of people for sure. But yeah, knowing what you and I know now about certain assets like Bitcoin, I would definitely shift that around a little bit. But yeah, I've always been very interested in investing ever since I was in college, and then I went into the military. I always did it on the side and read about it. Just coming from my background, I wanted to just forge economic security going forward and learn everything I could about it. And I really liked Harry Brown's philosophy of simplicity and keeping investing simple and kind of consistently hedged in certain markets against other markets, no matter what the world economic condition is. I think that's the benefit of something like the permanent portfolio, because you can always count on one or two portions of that portfolio going up, and then counterbalanced by the other portion. And as a whole, it gives you a pretty conservative, consistent return. In down periods, you tend to not go down as much as, let's say, being just in the S&P 500. So I was into things like that. And then a friend of mine, a mentor in the software development world, he had mentioned to me that he was reading about something called Bitcoin on a couple of forums. He and I talked pretty consistently online as we were creating like online marketing campaigns and developing some apps together. And I remember going to the forum and reading about it. I guess it was back in maybe 2009, 2010, something like that. Could have my dates wrong on that, but I read a little bit about it. I thought it was kind of fascinating, the decentralization aspect of Bitcoin, but I didn't have a thorough understanding of it. And I, like most people, I figured that this is something that I'm sure probably the government will shut down at some point. if it gets so I just kind of left it alone and I went back into my software development world and just focused most of my efforts there. And then it kind of percolated and in the news in the background for a while, and I ended up moving to Boston and I started reading about it again. And so I bought a little bit and I left it in the back burner. I bought it. I left it in my Coinbase account, and I was still focused on the traditional financial world, mostly. And I remember I was sitting in my office downtown Boston. I was in the Coast Guard at the time, and I read an article in a magazine, and it talked about how the federal government would probably start taxing Bitcoin like real estate. It would treat it as property. And the way I interpreted that at the time my Bitcoin hadn't moved that much in price. And at the time, I said to myself, you know what? They're already getting their hands in this, and they're gonna shut it down. So you know what? I might as well just cash out and put that money in my Roth IRA or something. So that's what I did. I did that, and then I ended up, working a few years or whatever. And then right before the pandemic, I started getting into Bitcoin again. I started reading about it again, watching some content. And with my IT background, I learned more about it in depth. And I realized that it was like a super, super secure network that probably couldn't be penetrated anytime soon, even with quantum computing. I realized that it was a lot safer and more decentralized than I even thought before. So I ended up buying more Bitcoin at that time. And ever since then, I just kept reading books on it, watching content on it, talking to other people about it. And it provided me a lot of hope in many different directions in life. Bitcoin has. It just fits my life philosophy a lot, the libertine philosophy of, being outside the reach of federal governments, mostly. That very much appealed to me because I slowly became pessimistic about our federal government in some ways. So there's just a lot of to Bitcoin that appeal to me, philosophically. And of course, the potential growth and returns, of course, are very much exciting too.
Well, that's an interesting first part of your journey. You really got in early and probably didn't understand it at the time. And we'll get into that, how you dealt with that, because that's in your course. But I was also thinking, you went from the conservative portfolio to Bitcoin, which is quite volatile. And we know on a log scale it goes up, but it's volatile in the short term. So, how did you handle the volatility?
Yes. Well, I had done some research, and other people that I admire in the Bitcoin space reminded me, like, um, I remember clearly when I was working in California, in the late 90s and around 2000 when the dot-com boom was happening. And I remember investing in some of those stocks. And I knew historically that I can clearly remember interviews with Jeff Bezos when Amazon was just coming out, and they were criticizing Amazon, saying, you guys aren't even profitable yet. How do you explain your stock price holding up and things like that? And he really had unbelievable discipline, and belief in himself to stay the course, because they were really working on growth and expanding and putting on net profits for a while. And of course, that strategy ended up working out. But historically, if you look at those charts, stocks like Amazon, they crashed like, I think, up to 98%. Two or three times. And of course, that shakes out most investors. Most investors can't take that kind of volatility. But the lesson is that if you had ideally lost your password to your account and not touched it, you'd probably be multimillionaire just from having a little bit of Amazon stock. So I knew when looking at the volatility of Bitcoin that it's a nascent asset. It makes sense that it's volatile in the beginning. But, every year that goes by and every period of FUD that Bitcoin conquers and seems to shake off just gives investors more confidence, that it's a long-term viable asset. And there's something about its intrinsic qualities that make it very durable.
Do you think long term the volatility will even out?
I do. I very much think the volatility will start coming down, and the returns will probably slow down too. We could have years, where returns jump up, but yeah, there's so much money now, there's so many inflows coming into Bitcoin that it should tamper down the volatility and the returns over time. But even saying that, the returns, I believe, will surpass traditional investments like the S&P 500 for quite a while. So it may be more volatile, than the S&P 500, but its volatility should slow down and come down.
I mentioned I really enjoyed your free course. And in that course, you start out with printing money. Why did you start out there, and tell us how you realized how much we're printing?
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons that I've stayed in Bitcoin, and one reason I got into it was through education. The more I learned about our monetary system and the history of fiat, reading books like The Bitcoin Standard and doing my own type of research, really the dollar is just following the history of all other fiat currencies that have ever existed. And that's really the main problem that we have that's causing inflation. And it's not allowing our returns in the stock market and things like that to keep up with inflation or beat inflation very often. And I'm not talking about the inflation, that the government quotes, but real inflation on the ground. So yeah, you know how it is. Once you educate yourself on fiat and the printing press on money, you start looking for an escape hatch. And it just so happens it looks like Bitcoin is kind of the perfect escape hatch, because of its limited supply and a bunch of other qualities too.
I love that you mentioned all the other things that Bitcoin represents, because yes, it's 21 million and there's a fixed supply, also represents delayed gratification in a way, because we buy now because the way the system's set up, it tends to go up in price. Do you focus a lot on price, or are you here more for everything else that Bitcoin represents?
Great question. I absolutely love paying attention to price. I know I know a lot of Bitcoiners, claim that, oh, I don't look at price. It doesn't mean anything to me. Well, I believe we're going to be in the fiat world for quite a while before we get in onto a Bitcoin standard. So, of course, I'm very excited about the returns of Bitcoin denominated in fiat like the dollar. I believe those returns will be outsized and greater than traditional stock market investments. And of course, it'll beat bonds and gold, which it has been for a very long time. But yes, I pay attention to price, was very fascinated with the traditional finance world before that. So I've always been looking at price. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because again, I think it will be quite some time until, the world possibly goes to a Bitcoin standard.
Yes, I think that's true. And that's how we measure Bitcoin at the moment. We know how to measure it in US dollars because we know what 10,000 US dollars can buy us now versus what it can buy us in 5 years' time if the system continues the way they're going. So, what challenges do you think Bitcoin faces?
Not a lot at this point, thankfully. I think, Bitcoin could have been shut down in the early days, possibly by Unified Front was with some of the top governments. But I think we're past that point now. We've kind of passed the Rubicon. So I don't see a lot of challenges because, holistically, when you look at the situation, people are being squeezed more and more every year financially by inflation, by the printing of money. And therefore, common sense says that they're going to look for an escape hatch. They're going to look for a better return on their money, on their investments, because, investing in index funds is not doing what it used to because inflation has increased. So I think that's why Bitcoin will ultimately keep succeeding, because people are looking for a better return. They're looking for a way to get ahead, and Bitcoin is kind of a perfect way to do that. You start siphoning some of your income into Bitcoin, and all of a sudden your life gets better. Your purchasing power increases because you're gaining more than inflation. So as far as challenges, it's hard for me to see any serious challenges. At this point, I've really racked my brain, looking for ways that it could be stopped. I don't think quantum computing can hack Bitcoin in the future. I've looked at that. I think now there are enough powerful people with a vested interest in Bitcoin that it's going to be hard to stop Bitcoin. I mean, now we have members of Congress, and probably a lot more members of Congress than we even know of, that themselves are invested in Bitcoin. It's kind of amazing, it's like, I call it like a benevolent virus. Bitcoin finds its way into everything. And, once it touches you, you tend to like it more, and you learn about it more, and you end up investing more.
You made a really good point about inflation, and that when it affects more and more people, they look for better returns. What have you noticed about inflation in your life? Have you noticed a big increase?
I have. I mean, just absolutely. I am renting right now in Boston, and I have absolutely noticed the last 2 to 3 years that my income doesn't go as far as it used to on rent, on groceries, routine car repairs, things like that. And it's kind of it's a cumulative process and effect, it slowly creeps up on you from so many different directions that it's hard to point your finger at something and say, okay, that's what's costing me the most, because it's kind of everything. Inflation is insidious, and it's kind of, it's evil in some respects, I think, because as like Jeff Booth and others talk about, it really is a form of theft that governments are perpetrating on their people. Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the population is still unaware that it's theft, that governments are inflating the money supply so that they can fund a lot of their priorities that may not be the priorities of the people. Things like war and other types of activities, pet projects, whatever. So yeah, it's not a good thing. And my hope is that more and more people are becoming aware, and hopefully we can call a lot of our officials to account, for the insidious inflation.
And I even wonder if they're aware that it's theft. We have been so conditioned to think that 2 to 3% is normal. I think even some of them think it's normal because we've all been brought up on Keynesian economics. And as we know, people closest to the money printer benefit the most. So just by being in government, they benefiting. So as long as they keep it down, it's okay. That's kind of what I see. I don't know.
I agree with you. I have no doubt that there are many officials in our government that are not very educated on basic economics, and they may not even understand inflation at all. And a lot of economic scholars would argue that inflation is completely normal, both high and low. But there's an argument to be made that inflation is not normal, especially higher rates of inflation. But one thing we do know is it makes people's lives a lot more difficult, and it's a crushing blow to billions of people in the world. I think
Especially when our salaries don't go up at the same rate.
absolutely our pay raises are not keeping up with the rate of inflation. I grew up here in America, and the way I look at it is I remember living in a middle class suburban home in a medium-sized city here growing up. And my dad had a good job in business in the insurance sector, and we did fine. My mom did not work for many years while she raised us at home, and we had a nice house in the suburbs. Now that's virtually impossible. The average couple, both parents have to work if they have kids and they want to buy a house in a basic middle class suburb, they have to work. And sometimes they have to work more than one job to make ends meet. I think that it's just slowly changed, in that direction over the years. So you don't have, riots in the streets and people vociferously complaining about this, because it really is the boiling frog syndrome, isn't it? I really think that's what it is.
I often think about that we're turning up the heat very slowly and people don't notice.
Right. I really believe that's kind of what's going on.
Many people think Bitcoin is too expensive at 60,000 and they don't want to buy because, well, they can't get to a whole Bitcoin. I saw on your Twitter you said we're still early, and you talk about the Lindy effect in your course. Why do you think we're still early?
I think we're still early because if you look at the percentages of people who own Bitcoin throughout the world, I believe it's like under 5% or something. So if that's true, we got a long ways to go before people recognize Bitcoin as something very much similar to gold, this precious asset where you can park your money and stave off inflation and consider Bitcoin as a safe haven asset. Actually, just my personal experience of talking to people in my circles about Bitcoin and my family and things like that, most people that I talk to, they have heard of Bitcoin, but as soon as you tell them that you're a big advocate of it or you're very interested in it, usually I get an expression like, you know, really? Are you, what's wrong with you? So that kind of reaction, tells me that we're still early, because a lot of these people I'm talking to are very intelligent and very successful in their fields, brilliant people, some of them. But you bring up Bitcoin and they look at you like you're crazy, which is fascinating to me, because the more you study Bitcoin and learn about it, the more I see Bitcoin as the least crazy thing. It's a very common sense vehicle, Bitcoin is. The way it was designed, the way it grows, the way it exists is very rational to me, very rational.
Yeah, the way it's an honest protocol based on energy and transparent and all of the qualities we want in a government.
Yes,
You make me laugh
absolutely.
because I post these on Facebook, just a link to it, and I have about 1,000 friends and about 3 people like it. Nobody dares go near, and because I believe so deeply, I don't mind doing that. There are probably some
Right.
people who won't speak to me because people think it's fraud or, for criminals, whatever some people think.
I know that's amazing that you have that confidence because you've educated yourself. You've done the work and the research. I know what you mean. I'm at the same point now where it doesn't bother me at all now when people look at me like I'm crazy if I mention it, because I'm so convicted, about it. And I could be wrong. We could be wrong, but even if I was wrong, I think it's a great attempt at creating something technological that could create a much more fair and just world by having this transparent ledger that cannot be manipulated, that cannot be hacked. That in itself is inspirational to me.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I love that you said that. I also think, yeah, if I'm wrong, well, the people who really care about me will be there. But like I said, I like what it stands for. How much of your time is spent in the Bitcoin world now? And you mentioned not many of your friends are in it. Are there a few?
I do have a couple of friends. I've met people just through my Twitter interactions, and some people in Boston, I've met that are like secret Bitcoiners that you don't know right off the bat. and then you learn later they are. So that's exciting. And yeah, just the more I write about it, the more I get immersed into that world. I keep meeting great people, and
And you
um,
went to the convention, you met some people there.
I did. I went to the national convention. It was amazing. I really enjoyed that. A lot of the speakers and just the energy there gave me a lot of hope. Just a lot of people from around the world were there trying to create a better world through an honest, monetary system.
So, of all the qualities of Bitcoin, self sovereignty, another payments rail, what appeals to you the most?
I would have to say either the self sovereignty aspect of Bitcoin, where I am banking myself by holding my own Bitcoin. I have my own keys to my account, and no government or thief can take that away from me. That is in itself is very fascinating to me and revolutionary in itself. Just the fact that we can bank ourselves now is amazing. And it just, especially when you look at a lot of populations around the world that are a lot more oppressed than you and I are here, the hope that it brings those people is fascinating to me. So yes, the whole self-sovereignty aspect of Bitcoin and the limited supply, the digital scarcity was an amazing invention from Satoshi and Bitcoin that I think kind of changed the world.
It was. And the fact that he walked away and didn't take any credit for it is one of the most amazing acts of no ego,
Right. It
ego
really
death.
was.
Yeah.
Satoshi could have been a group of programmers or someone, but yeah, it's kind of a miracle, that occurred. I mean, like you said, very devoid of ego to give something like that to the world and walk away. Granted, I think probably the FBI was after him, from what I've read,
Hmm.
once Bitcoin started gaining a little bit of steam. But yeah, there's just no other way that Bitcoin could have kept succeeding, to where it is today without that generous contribution with no personal stake. So
Yeah, and you've brought up just a few times that I think we are very lucky in this country. I do talk to people in Zimbabwe, and I've been on Twitter Spaces with some of them, and it's much more challenging in the third world. They have to buy Bitcoin peer to peer, and the government's watching what they're doing, and they're still going for it because they want to be their own bank. They want to be self sovereign. I just give people a lot of credit. I'm grateful we can buy it, but I also want to. I'm also
absolutely. I've traveled the world some too, and I've seen firsthand in places like some of South America and other places, how people struggle day to day with their local currencies. And Americans, we are so spoiled in some ways, even though life is getting harder here for sure. But in some ways, we are absolutely in a bubble, and we have no idea, how some of these people struggle with their inflating currencies. I heard recently something about Argentina, I think it was, where is a lot of people there, as soon as they get paid, they go out and they buy, necessary goods and food and things like that because they know next month their money's going to be worth less. So I can't imagine living like that. But it's an everyday reality, for hundreds of millions of people.
yeah, yeah.
So
Well, I've really enjoyed talking with you today, Tyler.
yeah.
Besides Bitcoin, what else are you passionate about?
Oh, good question. Well, I've always enjoyed programming for sure in the software development world. I love just being able to, create products, apps, or whatever based on a new idea that you might have. I love the power that development has given me over the years, just for fun and professionally. It's helped me a lot. What else am I interested in? Is there anything else to be interested in besides Bitcoin?
No, it covers everything. Forget that question.
No, but no, great question. Current events, although I will say I'm trying to steer away from current events in the past year or so because I find that my mental health is much better if I'm trying to avoid the news and a lot of the insanity that's involved with that and how it's disseminated, through social media and online sources and things like that. But yeah, for years I was definitely like a current events news junkie. Not so much today. I spend a lot of time learning about Bitcoin and just the IT, the technology world in general. I keep up with some sports and history. I do a lot of self improvement type reading and things like that.
What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom for me means that, I can have a chance at accomplishing certain things professionally in whatever field that I choose. I can at least, attempt and take a chance in that direction without any kind of interference from like an oppressive system. Just having some kind of fair shot to do something like that. And, freedom, of course, involves with having enough time to possibly experiment on certain ideas that I have that I want, try to bring into fruition in the world. Hopefully I'm not having to work so much per day that I don't have any time to possibly perform experiments and, or start a business or develop a piece of software or create a piece of art or play music. I also play drums on the side. That's really a top passion of mine is playing music. We kind of come around to Bitcoin again. Bitcoin, I think, is going over time is going to allow a lot of us to pursue things like the arts and other passions, because we're not going to be on the hamster wheel maybe as much as we are today just to get by.
And that's exactly why I asked that question, because I think Bitcoin can offer a certain amount of freedom. And I just find it incredible. The last four people that I interviewed all love music. So there's something
Huh.
about Bitcoin and music, and what a
Oh,
great
yeah.
connection.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Tyler. Tell us where
Yes.
people can find you, and I'll post a link to your course below.
Thank you so much, Paula. You can find me at Tyler Cornett, CORNETT underscore on Twitter. And you will be able to find me at tylercornett.com.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Great to see you.
Great to see you too.